Let's switch in English because the next speaker is from Copenhagen. I'm talking about Copenhagen science. Jakob Engberg, his name. He's a sign painter, one of the few sign painter, probably the only one in Copenhagen full time. So, thank you. And he will talk about how this traditional work can survive in this digital era, right?
Correct.
So please join me on the stage. We didn't test the presentation before, so I hope that everything is okay.
It looks all right. Yeah. The font is a bit different, but it's okay. Can you hear me? Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jakob, and I'm a sign painter from Denmark. I work by the name of Copenhagen Signs, and today I will show you a little bit about how I work, and I will talk a little bit about why traditional hand-painted signs has a place in a modern world. So I mainly work with hand-painted signs, but I also do custom lettering for logos, gold leaf work, and wall paintings like this, done with spray paint. I like to explore and experiment with typography, and this is for me a way to create some attention towards traditional way of working, but making it look fresh and make it look interesting. And I like to work with simple shapes and geometrical shapes and explore on the boundaries within legibility. Ligatures is a thing I like to explore as well. It's also something where you can make people stop and think about what they're reading or looking at. So I am a part of a new generation of traditional sign painters, and the way of working with sign painting like this has gotten a revival within the last 10 years or so. Everything I am going to show you today is hand-painted. I never use a stencil or a mask or a vinyl or anything like that. So it's all done by hand. Sometimes you paint a font or a logo for a client, but most of my work is done completely without the use of computer and all lettered by hand. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about my process, show you some examples of my work, and yeah, let's go through some of this. Here's the tools I work with. So when you're working without a computer, you have to rely on your eyes and a lot of these analog tools. The brush is, of course, the most important tool, and this is, can you say, this is what I make a living from. It's the brushes. These brushes are made specially for sign painting. They're called lettering quills, and these are, yeah, this is my collection, and this is my sweethearts. So writing with a brush is one of the fundamental skills as a sign painter. Not only it's a lot of fun, it's also a fast way to produce hand-painted signs. Here's some lowercase script. Here's another version of single-stroke lettering. It's a block letters, as we sign painters call it, sans serif. All done completely straight off the brush, no sketch or guides or anything like that. Also, you will notice the rather rare NOPQR ligature in the right corner. It's not so often you use it, though. So here is another example of single-stroke lettering, which again is a quite important skill of a sign painter and a fast way to produce signs. Here's another example, and this style is called casual lettering, and it's very common used for new time sign painters because not only it's a lot of fun, it's also quite legible, and yeah, it works quite well for some reason for this traditional way of painting signs. Fast to do, and I love this. This is something I also teach at my workshops. Here's some single stroke lettering for a client. This is actually for a tattoo from a client from the States. Here is an example of the traditional pouncing technique, which is used to transfer my lettering or a pattern onto a surface to create guidelines for painting. And here is my studio or office, if you want. This is where I prepare my patterns and sketches before I paint my signs. My sketchbook, here is where the design and the lettering begins with a pencil. And here is this is where I can explore my lettering before I make it into a hand-painted sign, or in this case, cut by hand in wood and gild it with 24-karat gold leaf to turn it into a piece of custom lettering work. This was a part of an exhibition in Copenhagen this spring. Oh, here is how I write with a brush. This is like the only video in this presentation, but I want to show you this because it's a good way for you to see how I use the maul stick and how I use this brush with long hairs. Essentially, this is calligraphy. It's just a different tool and different paint. And yeah, so this is an example of casual lettering, which is somewhat the sign painter's handwriting. And yeah, so notice the maul stick on which I support my hand, and the brush which has quite long hairs, which are able to store a lot of paint, making me able to make long strokes, which is essential for sign painting. And the word is not really significant in any way, it's just a nice word to write. So, before I found my current path as a sign painter, I've been working with different fields of creative work. I've working with graphic design, printing, painting, bookbinding, photography, street art, exploring different fields of creative work before I started my apprenticeship as a sign painter. And that is when I found my passion. That is where I realized that this is what I need to do. Yeah, so here's my studio, and yeah, this is where I surround myself with pieces of work. So everything I will show you today is work by me. I'm not going to show a lot of work by other people. There's a few examples from 100 years ago. But yeah, so apprenticeship. I started an apprenticeship as a sign maker around 8 years ago, and finally felt like I found like my right place. This is actually my first hand-painted sign. I think it's 7 years ago. Did not know what I was doing at all, but it looks rather decent. So this is from a font. It's not hand-lettered. So I like the combination of working with my hands and doing carpentry and gilding and painting, installing letters, and everything evolving around typography. And that is something I've always loved. And I was always interested in traditional sign painting, but I didn't really consider it an option to do as a profession, because I was busy learning about modern sign making techniques, which is mainly digital print and vinyl, which we'll be talking about later. But now and then we were painting signs by hand, and this is where I really found my passion, and I simply fell in love with working with the brush. I still remember on one of the first jobs during my apprenticeship, that time somehow stood still. I was working for around 5 or 6 hours, and I realized that like, I figured that I felt like I've been working for like a few hours, and it was sort of a moment where I realized that this is what I want to do, like time stood still. So at my apprenticeship, this is where I learned how to paint signs. I didn't learn much about hand lettering. All these photos are from my apprenticeship, and I tried to push it more and more and see if I could like get more jobs as a sign painter at my apprenticeship. But you don't make a lot of money from doing hand painted signs, so it was quite difficult to convince them to do it. And at my apprenticeship, I had a mentor, like an old-time sign painter, and he would teach me how to do. And at one point, I remember telling him, I wish I was able to make a living from the brush, become a full-time traditional sign painter. And he would laugh and say, like, it's impossible nowadays, and vinyl is king and all this. Like, you can't make a living from it. But I proved him wrong, and now I'm the only full-time traditional sign painter in Denmark. I'm not the only one. There's a lot of other sign painters, but I am the only full-time sign painter, which is quite a privilege. So after 4 years of apprenticing, I graduated with a medal and got then headhunted for a position at one of the oldest sign companies of Denmark. And here I work with gold leaf, screen printing, sign painting as well. And though the majority of the work was digital print and vinyl. And on the side, I started Copenhagen Signs, which is 3 years ago now. And at one point I was working 40 hours a week at my daytime job, making signs with computers, machines, printers, and plotters. And in my spare time, evenings and weekends, I was doing hand-painted signs on my own. And at one point I was able to quit my job and go full-time as a traditional sign painter, which I've done ever since. And it's like, yeah, by far the best decision I've ever made. So let me show you some of the client work I do. So my clients are usually small businesses, cafes, restaurants, tattoo shops, barber shops, jewelry shops, whatnot. And for jobs like this, I usually design everything by hand, and I don't use a computer in any part of the process. This is the most, for me, fun way to work, and where I can work creatively and put my own personality into the job. So all these signs here is done completely without the use of a computer and straight off the paper or straight off the brush. And this is also something I'm going to talk about if I'm able to make it, that this way of working completely without a computer gives the lettering a warm, human look, which I'm completely in love with, and one of the reasons that I really like to work this way. So the majority of my clients are small businesses, and commonly tattoo shops like this. And for some reason, sign painting and tattoo shops, they go quite well together. It really fits each other. So all of this, again, is just all hand-lettered and all hand-drawn. And for me, this is how you can see the person behind the lettering. The minute you bring the lettering into a computer, the minute you digitalize the lettering, it sort of loses this like vibrant and like honest, imperfect human touch, which I like about the hand-painted sign. So here's an example of a sketch, which is later painted onto a boat like this. Painting boats is a pain in the ass because it's always like pretty difficult, but I'm pretty happy with this result. Another example of another single stroke script for another tattoo shop. But here is big business of Copenhagen. So it's not only small businesses, but bigger companies and even corporate businesses want a hand-painted sign. And in this case, I often hand-paint their logo or I paint a font. Like here, I've chosen a font from a foundry called House Industries. And this makes sense when you have a 10-meter long ferry to paint a font, and also according to the client's budget. So it's still a hand-painted sign, and definitely more unique than print or vinyl, but it's not hand lettering. For clients like this, now all of this is like businesses that want a hand-painted sign, but they have their own logo, they have their own design. And in this case, they're not buying the actual hand-painted sign as much as they're buying the story. So like a digital design bureau, they get their digitally designed logo hand-painted on the wall of the reception, gives them a story to tell, some human values to identify with. And they are sending a signal of acknowledging handcrafted work, but they still maintain their own visual identity. And jobs like this are okay to do. I mean, I'm happy as long as I have a brush in my hand, but obviously it's not so challenging to paint a font as it is to design my own lettering, which I have some examples on here. Here's some process shots from a tattoo shop as well. And here you can see the beginning, the initial sketches onto some samples for the clients, and the finalized sketch placed on the window before water gilding and surface gilding everything from behind of the glass. And jobs like this, they don't make you rich, but they're a lot of fun to do. And yeah, here's another video, because gold leaf work is quite difficult to photograph. By the way, there is lots of beautiful gold leaf work in Torino. I've been shooting signs like a tourist all days here. So yeah, this is an example of a job done like completely like you would do 100 years ago, like completely from the hand. Here's another example of some script which turns into a sign. So I trace it and I scale it and transfer it, and this was in 3 different signs. Here I find inspiration from Danish fascias from the beginning of the 20th century. And I do a bit of research before I make my own sketches and make it into my own version of that style of lettering and painting signs for a client, which gives me more or less free hands to do whatever I want. These jobs are the fun ones, and these is I don't make a lot of money off of these jobs, but I'm gladly to put a lot of effort and hours into jobs like this, because it's so much fun to do. So, why? Why pay more to get an imperfect piece of work? Why choose a hand-painted sign? Why not get a sign made with like modern technology? So 100 years ago, hand-painted signs was the best, fastest, and easiest ways to make signs. So since then, the industry has been through many changes, from screen-printed signs to neon signs, and later came vinyl and digital print. And nowadays, most signs are being done digitally and on machines, like most products in our modern society. So 100 years ago, a sign painter would be able to, with guidelines and straight from a scratch layout, paint up to 5 different alphabets: Roman capitals, sans serif, script, decorative, black letter, perfect spacing, lowercase, uppercase, because they were taught so. They were taught at school. And nowadays, you can't really learn this. There is a school in LA, the LA Trade Tech College, where you can study for 2 years and you can learn how to paint signs the traditional ways. But this is pretty unique, and not everyone is privileged enough to be able to move to LA for 2 years to learn how to paint signs. So if you want to learn how to do hand lettering, which is the foundation of hand-painted signs, you need to work on yourself. You need to learn by doing, and you need to study. So nowadays, the majority of signs are made on computers and on machines, printers and plotters. The materials are usually plastic. It's fast, it's cheap, and everyone can do it. And nowadays, yeah, the vast majority of signs is made this way. And it creates city landscapes looking like this. This is just an average street of Copenhagen, Denmark. And so for me, the sad thing is not only that these signs will perish fast due to the plastic materials, and the huge waste of plastic materials in the production is quite bad for the environment. The really sad thing for me is the overall aesthetic of the city is sort of degraded by this visual pollution. And this is one of the things I'm fighting or working towards changing. Here's a photo of a sign I found in Slovenia last month. And this piece of vinyl is probably around 5 years old. And it looks like this already. And you could get it hand painted and make it last for 50 years or even more, like in this case. So one of the differences between a digital made sign in vinyl and a hand lettered sign made with a brush is that people interact with the sign in a different way. Due to the fact we are surrounded by digital type and plastic signs everywhere, if you see something done by hand, it makes you want to stop and look again, like how is this that this sign are looking? It looks like imperfect. It has this vibrant look. And this is, yeah, again, what I find really beautiful, and also what the clients want to have in order to separate themselves from the majority of the other shop owners who has maybe the exact same coffee as you do. So choosing a hand-painted sign is a way to separate yourself from the majority of signs. So when you see a hand-painted sign or gold leaf on a window, it will attract people in a different way than a digital rendered vinyl sign will. Here is what a unique handmade sign will do. This is, for me, some of the most beautiful I can imagine. This sign is probably around 50, 60 years old, maybe even 100 years old. And there's an expression within sign painters called vinyl dyes and paint ages. And for me, this is a really good example on how it becomes even more beautiful by time. We can talk a lot about the lettering here, which is quirky and odd. And still, for me, it's really a good example on something that aged gracefully. And another example on how vinyl ages. So here's just a few different comparisons. Yeah, so, yeah, sure, I am nostalgic, and I love traditional hand-painted signs, no doubt about it. And of course, not all signs should be hand-painted or lettered. It would not make sense to do wayfinding at the airport with gold-leaf glass signs. Would be nice though, I would do it. But so for me, being educated in sign making in general, it's important for me to choose the right method, the right approach, and the right material for the job. And I often encourage my clients to choose vinyl for a certain job or print for a certain job. So it's not like I'm completely fixed on the fact that hand-painted signs are better in every way. So thankfully more and more values the quality of the handmade sign, and so me and my fellow sign painters, us new-timers, we are working on bringing back the traditional ways of working, because sign painting has literally died out in most countries. So signs that will last, and signs that has personality, and signs which is imperfect. This is what the revival is about, making something separate itself from the majority of the machine-made signs. So yeah, this is my ambition, and this is what I'm working on, and I want to show the industry, and I want to show the world that there is an alternative to signs made on a computer and on a plotter. And thankfully, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of sign painters around the world starting to bringing back this traditional way of working. So at the end here, I'm going to show you some different examples of how I work when I'm not doing client work, because I like to explore typography and lettering, and this is where I have no client. I'm my own client, and I can do whatever I want. And I do this to become better at what I'm doing, and I'm doing this to explore lettering, and I'm doing this to improve my skills, making me better and more capable of doing client work. So here's an example of some weird ligatures, which is something I like to explore a lot. And for me, it's a way to make people think an extra time before reading. This is hand-painted on a suitcase, and the dots are surface gilded. Yeah, and my sketchbook is also where I sort of have the freedom to experiment and explore, and this is, it's very free for me to work with the pencil. Here is a sign I made for a friend at the Letterhead meet in London in August. And this is something we sign painters, we do a lot. We make signs for each other. It's quite a nerdy business, but it's very commonly done. And here's a sketch for an Australian sign painter, London sign painter, Jed Palmer. Should do yourself a favor and check out his work if you don't know him already. From sketch, geometrically analyzed reversed contrast A turned into a sign that says Barber. Sketchbooking, and here's from an exhibition last year in Copenhagen. Here's some single-stroke lettering from a workshop in Slovenia. And I'm going to fast forward to some other paintings. So here's some wall alphabets I really would like to show you here at the end. So this is a very free way of working, no sketch, just straight off the brush. Very fun way to explore lettering, working with very traditional shapes and bringing it into a context where it's more like fresh. Here's one of my favorite ligatures. It's a DE ligature. And here's an alphabet made entirely out of ligatures. And I want to show you these before I go. From sketch to wall painting. This style, I still need to figure out what to call this lettering style, but it's obviously quite Art Deco style. I really enjoy doing this. So much fun. It's like more like mathematics when you fit these shapes together. And here's the first one I did. And I'm really happy with the result of doing this. And again, it's really like free and loose to work this way. And then I am gonna fast forward to the end, which comes here. The end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a question for you.
Yeah?
Just for my curiosity, of course.
Yeah.
When you work with digital stuff, it is easy. You can select your font from your font book and so on. Here, you change most of the time the font. Do you have any mental trick to switch between the different styles and between the different fonts?
I mean, you work with different families like you do when you're as a type designer. So you have the different families of script and sans serifs and Roman styles or similar. And we as sign painters do the same, but we don't talk about typefaces of fonts. We talk about alphabets, because that's how before the digital ways of working with typography came into space, sign painters would have alphabets. And for some reason, sign painters are quite separated from typesetters and typographers who had typography specimens. So we work with alphabets, and when I have to design a decorative style or Art Nouveau style or a Roman style, I would use a reference from an old book from the 1920s, and I will look at it and I will get inspired, and this is how I use a reference.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for the workshop yesterday.
Thank you.